Okay, we're going to talk about SPSS. How do we code, organize, and run commands? By the end of this lecture, you will understand why and how we clean and screen data. You'll understand how to code and transform your data if needed. And we'll also go over specific SPSS commands for descriptive statistics, t-tests, ANOVAs, and bivariate correlations. Before we do that, we need to understand what is SPSS and how do we set it up. So SPSS is the statistical package for social sciences, and you're going to find this on most school computers at Springfield College. What SPSS allows us to do is to complete very complex statistics in a really short period of time. And this is the program that you'll be using if you complete any project at Springfield College, if you do an independent study, thesis, dissertation, or a senior capstone project. The program allows you to run both descriptive and inferential statistics. Within SPSS, we have three views: your data view, variable view, and your output view. So for our data view, that's the location where either you can physically enter all your data, or the location where you would download your data from another program like Qualtrics or Excel. Within our variable view is the location where you can manipulate different aspects of your data. So you can change the level of measurement, you can give your data labels, or you can assign it different values. Within our output view, this is a separate file that will open after you have run SPSS commands. Really important aspect about the output view is that you must save the file separately since it is a new window. For each of our views, this is an example of the data view. You have your variables listed at the top, and you have data inputted for each. You can see that we're in data view because it's lit up in blue right here at the bottom. If we pressed on variable view, it would look something like this. You have your variable names over here on the left-hand side. An important aspect to note about the variable names is that they can't contain any spaces between the characters. So if you want to label your variable, say the question that you asked, you would label it right over here. And that will pop up on SPSS. You can also assign values to different parts of your variable if you wish to. Say you were using a questionnaire to ask your participants their age, and 20 was 1, 21 years old was 2, 22 was 3, and so forth. You can list those values right here so you know that 20 is actually going to show up as a 1. Last but not least, our measure on the right-hand side is where you can change the level of measurement of your variable. This is really important that you select the correct level of measurement. So nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. If your measurement is nominal or ordinal, there's an option to select for those. If your level of measurement is interval or ratio, you would select the scale measure. Then our last view is our output view. So like I said earlier, this is going to be a separate window that pops open after you run a few commands. So you can see these are some of the commands. On the left, that just tells me the log, means that I ran a command. And then my output tables are displayed here. we'll go over that in a little bit more specific later on. So for the basic SPSS setup, you need to know that the setup is based upon rows versus columns. So our rows are across, our columns are down. Each row is going to represent a specific subject or participant. So in this view, I have 5 subjects shown: 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then each column is going to represent, excuse me, each column is going to represent a specific variable. So my variable is age. I have the variable gender, height, birth weight, birth ounces, exercise, number of texts sent, and so forth. So to read your input, this is your data view. So this is where you're specifically putting in your data. What is the age of subject number 4? Good, so their age, we go down to subject 4 over to age. They're gonna be 22 years old. And then how many hours per week does subject 2 exercise? Subject 2, you're gonna go over to hours per week, 4. So knowing this is really important just for setting up your SPSS. If you input your own data or if you download it from a program like Qualtrics or Excel, you want to make sure it's set up in the correct manner. Next, we're going to talk about data cleaning and screening. The first step you want to do when making sure your data is clean is that your variables are organized appropriately and that they're scored appropriately. So that's not a specific function you would run within SPSS, but that's something you always want to go over your data after you input it and make sure you've listed the correct variables and you've listed the correct level of measurement. An example of that on this screen is gender. So if we think about gender, what level of measurement would gender be? So gender would be a categorical level of measurement. So it's going to be our nominal level of measurement. I have it listed as interval or ratio. So that's something that either I listed it incorrectly or Qualtrics listed it incorrectly after the download. So that's something I would have to screen for, and I'd go back and change to the correct level of measurement. Garbage in equals garbage out. You have to screen your data to make sure it's appropriate. Ways in which you can screen your data through SPSS is by running descriptive statistics and frequency tables. We'll do an example of that in a little bit. One thing you really want to check on is if you're missing data. So an example of missing data would look like this. There are decimal points, but that subject did not answer that question, or as a researcher, you may have not inputted their data. So that's important to know. You need to identify and address outliers or extreme values. We're not going to go over that today, but you should remember to do so. And then you need to review whether or not your data meets the basic assumptions for your statistical analysis. Again, we're not going to go over that today, but that's also a really important factor to check. This is an example of what you would see when you download your data from a system like Qualtrics. You get a lot of extra information that you may not need. So all of the information on the screen right here is actually none of my variables. So you have the option to leave it where it is. From my perspective, I'm someone that would delete this information. If I need it again, I could always re-download it from Qualtrics, but these are not the variables I'm looking at. So you need to be aware when you do download your data from a system like Qualtrics, you'll get a lot of extra information within your data and your variable views. This is an example of cleaned data. So this is the same data set here, but you can't see these variables yet. And I have cleaned the data to look much more presentable and readable. I still have some issues. So gender is still coded as a scale. Within my birth weight, what I did was I transformed this data into measurable numbers. So I took the I don't knows, and that is left as missing data, and then I converted the 7 pounds or however it's listed into specifically ounces. So a method to screen for missing data, you can obviously see that some is missing here, but if you have many, many subjects, you don't want to go through and count all the data points that are missing. There's a function within SPSS that allows us to do so. So to run these commands, you're going to run descriptive statistics, analyze, go back down to descriptive statistics, click to run frequencies, and then enter all of your variables. We'll go over really how to run commands in a little bit, but this is an example of a command that you could run. Following that, on your output view, a frequency table would be shown. Within our frequency table, a couple of important aspects to look at: the total, missing, and then our total again. So missing shows us that there's 10 data points missing, 10 data points entered within our total of 20 data points, which would also be our sample size. You can also look at the frequencies to make sure you inputted your data correctly. And that's one way to screen for your missing data. Okay, so while we're in SPSS, we need to understand what it means to follow commands. Typically, your commands will be look like how they're posted on the left, and each indent signifies a new step within running the commands. So to run descriptive statistics, your first step is to press the Analyze button at the top of the screen. That drops down this menu bar. Within our menu bar, we want to click Descriptive Statistics, opens a new bar, and we want to press Frequencies. Once we press the frequencies, a new table will pop up. Our next step is to enter all of your variables. So I'm going to press a variable. To enter the variable, you need to press the arrow, and it enters into the variables box. So I'm going to repeat this step for all the variables that I want to analyze. Once my variables are within the variables box, I'm going to press the statistics button. When I press the statistics button, a new window pops up. Then I'm going to select everything that I want run. So all of these values that have an X next to them means that I want to select them. So mean, median, mode, standard deviation, min and max. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to press the continue button and OK. And once you have pressed OK, your output screen will open up with your tables of your descriptive frequencies. And if we go back, this would be an example of a table that would pop up. Okay. So before we get into running commands for specific statistics, we're going to talk about transforming your data. So transforming your data is a really good tool if you want to work specifically within SPSS. So transforming and coding your data gives you the ability to calculate new variables from variables you've already added. So for example, say you're testing pre and post test and you want to calculate the difference between the two. You can use the transform function to do so. You can also conduct this within Excel and then copy and paste your data points. But again, if you have a lot of data points, if you have a lot of subjects, you may want to consider doing it specifically within SPSS. So how do we do this? We have a little bit of a more complicated formula that we're doing, but we'll go through an example of how to sum or add multiple scores. So on the left, we have our commands. You're going to start with the transform button at the top of the screen and then press compute. Once you press compute, this table will pop up. The first step is to name your target variable. So you're calculating a new variable. What do you wish to name it? The second step is to add in your variables and the appropriate expression for each. So I'm taking the sum of multiple variables. So say I want to sum Q6 through Q8. This would be really helpful if you have a questionnaire and you're testing the overall sum or average of, say, 10, 20, 30 questions on the questionnaire. So I'm going to press on my variable. I press the little arrow and it enters into the numeric expression. Then I'm going to press the plus button because I'm taking the sum. I'll press the next variable, press the arrow, it enters in the expression, and so forth. You can use the function groups on the right-hand side here and pick specific functions if you choose to. After you have added all of your numbers in, you're going to press OK, and a new variable will pop up on your data view screen. This is an example of how to average multiple scores. It's very similar steps. You're going to do a different function. And over here on the right, I have an example of how you would use that function button. So I'd press all, find the mean, press the mean, and then I would add in my variables that I wanted to average. Once I have everything in the variables, I'm going to press OK. And this is an example of what the output would look like. So this is not an output screen. This is within our data view. So my new stats prep pops up, and this is a sum of the calculation I conducted, and then stats prep 1. This is the average of the calculation that I conducted for all the scores. If you need to recode your data in any way, these are the SPSS steps to do so. An example of this would say you gave a questionnaire item on age, and it was downloaded as 1 through 4 or 1 through 5, but that is not their actual ages. So say you wanted to change your 4 into 21 or your 5 back into a 22. You would follow these steps to do so. And this is what, if we followed these steps, this is what that window would look like. First, you'd select your variable. So I'm going to select age. I'm going to press the arrow and it's going to send it into the middle box. Then I'm going to name my variable. So if I wanted to give it a different name like age 1, or if I wanted to give it a label like true age, I would press the change button. And then I'd select old and new values, and a new window would pop up. Within the old and new value, I'm going to type in all of my current codes. So I'm going to type in a 5 for old value. I want that now to be a 22. So I type in a 22, then I press add, and it will enter into this box. You can see I've already coded 3 to 20 and 4 to 21. Once I've done that for all of my values, I'm going to press continue. And that is where we get this new variable with the appropriate ages recoded. Okay, so the end of this lecture, we're going to talk about descriptive and inferential statistics and how to run commands for each. I won't go over the specific commands, but you have access to them if you need to run them. So first, a quick review. What are descriptive statistics and what are inferential statistics? Your descriptive statistics are going to describe the sample, and your inferential statistics are going to make inferences about the population based on data you collected from your sample. And what are specific categories within descriptive statistics? We have 4: summaries of data, measures of central tendency, measures of variation or dispersion, and then our measures of position. So we went over a few commands for descriptive statistics. They're listed up here on your left again. This is another example of what you may find within your output view. This is a table that tells you the sample size. You have 20 data points. You have none missing. You have the mean of that variable, the median, the mode, your standard deviation, our minimum value, and our maximum value. What information do we get from this table? I just went over that. If you want to pick out specifics, please do so. So for our inferential commands, the end of this lecture, you're going to have commands for a parametric independent groups t-test, a Mann-Whitney u-test, a parametric repeated measures t-test, Wilcox signed rank, a one-way independent groups ANOVA, a one-way repeated measures ANOVA, and a bivariate correlation. As we go through the slides, they're all specifically listed. You have an example of how you want your data set up on the left, and then you have the commands on the right. I'm not going to go through step by step of each command, but I will go through each slide. Please feel free to pause and use these commands when needed. Okay, that is it. Thank you. Please contact me if you have any questions.